At the end of the 19th century, as a revolutionary mood swept across Europe, a new style of art developed in Tsarist Russia. The avant-garde movement broke with millennia of artistic tradition and produced some of the most subversive early modern art. The avant-gardists captured the revolutionary mood in Russia and became the official flag bearers of the Communist Revolution in 1917. They produced work that made use of basic geometrical forms that was intended to illustrate our base shared humanity and the aspiration to live up to the scientific principles of functional organization in a Marxist society. The message in works like Kazimir Malevich's suprematist composition was simple. We all fit together as a democratic community. Our human nature naturally coexists. We have no need for czars, kings, and despots. In 1913, the painter Natalia Goncharova wrote that, "I am convinced that modern Russian art is developing so rapidly and has reached such heights that within the near future it will be playing a leading role in international life. Contemporary Western ideas can no longer be of any use to us." The movement known as the Constructivists advocated pragmatic and progressive art that could engineer and build towards the perfect future. In Alexander Rodchenko's art, we see geometric shapes, interlaid circles, or diverse dots spread across the canvas. Again, the message is revolutionary. We are separate but the same, and we have the potential to align, to come together as one and build a communal future. As Boris Groys writes, it is in avant-garde art that we find a direct connection between the will to power and the artistic will to master the material and organize it according to laws dictated by the artists themselves. And while the avant-garde movement found favor with the new Bolshevik government for a short while, by the mid-1930s it hadn't just disappeared, but was actively banished, despised by the regime as being elitist and inaccessible, of being an art form unaligned with the tastes of the people. Socialist realism became the dominant style of art in the Soviet Union between the 1920s and 1960s, and under Stalin became the only style of art allowed by the state. Unlike the avant-garde, socialist realism, first and foremost, had to be realistic. But it had to also exemplify communist values. It had to educate and instill hope. So that stuck between the need to be realistic and idealistic, it occupied a contradictory and disingenuous space, and what defined it was its utilization as a tool of totalitarian dictatorship. It was, as Anne Demetra remarked in 1966, an ideologically refined product of totalitarian thinking. In Lenin's Party Organization and Party Literature, written in 1905, he wrote, "Down with non-party writers, down with Superman writers. The literary cause must become part of the general proletarian cause." It was fear of the intrusion of capitalism, of the remnants of the bourgeois, of the potential poisoning influence of the West when trying to build socialism in one country, that led Stalin to declare that artists are engineers of the souls, and that the soul would be whatever Stalin willed it to be. Stalin would personally look at works, read novels, watch plays, so that he could give his stamp of approval or callous condemnation of each. If, like the author Alexander Solzhenitsyn, you said or wrote the wrong thing, you could become one of the 1,000,000 people sent to the Gulag, or worse, one of the 3 million killed in the Great Terror. Socialist realism was to be the artistic style for painting, film, music, literature, and even architecture. 1929 was the year of the Great Break, the beginning of the Stalinist Revolution, and all art had to show communist party-mindedness and signs of a bright future to come. Georgy Plekhanov declared that there can be no doubt that art acquires a social significance only insofar as it depicts, evokes, or conveys actions, emotions, and events that are of significance to society. This mode of thinking was directly counter to Stalin's exiled rival Leon Trotsky, who argued early on that as long as a literary school was not hostile to revolution, their diversity should be encouraged and supported, and that there was no such thing no use in their being, a purely proletarian culture. Trotsky was a believer in art for art's sake, whereas for the socialist realist, this was a reprehensible idea, analogous with bourgeois sentimentality. Paintings like Isaac Brodsky's Lenin usually showed Lenin or Stalin dressed simply, pensively working, the paintings creating the cult of the leader, or Ivan Bevzenko's Young Steelworkers, showing the proletariat hard at work, but colourful and happy. Alexander Gerasimov's Stalin and Voroshilov in the Kremlin After the Rain shows the towers of Moscow, an almost imperceptible line of people, and Stalin, dressed plainly, wisely looking to a future in the near distance. Yuri Pemenov paints a new Moscow, bright and bustling with new cars and trams. This wasn't Moscow as it was, but as it was going to be. In socialist realist novels, a proletarian hero usually succeeds against all odds. In Fyodor Gladkov's Cement, published in 1925, a Red Army soldier returns home to find the town disillusioned with communism. But a few remain steadfast examples of socialist ideals, and in Nikolai Ostrovsky's How the Steel Was Tempered, a young man wounded in the October Revolution overcomes health problems to become a writer who inspires the workers reconstructing the country. Many of the tropes of the socialist realist novel were inspired by Maxim Gorky's 1906 novel Mother, the story of a mother and a son overcoming hardship to become involved in revolution. Private publishing houses were soon taken over by the state. Even music had to be revolutionary in its spirit. When Stalin initiated the first 5-year plan to revolutionize Soviet agriculture and industry in 1928, cinema also became subservient to central planning. While the early years of Soviet culture saw innovative filmmaking from the likes of Dziga Vertov and his Man with a Movie Camera, still lauded by critics as being a monumental moment in the history of cinema today, film under Stalin became strictly socialist realist. Across the media, Stalin was always referred to as great, beloved, bold, wise, inspirer, and genius, a strong father figure with a great mass of loving Soviet children. Pictures and statues appeared in almost every public space, and the figure of Stalin was idealized in films like 1950's Fall of Berlin. In these senses, socialist realism is not socialist at all, nor is it Marxist. It is instead a kind of authoritarian realism. The future is in our hands, it screams, but everything is going as planned. It was propaganda of the highest level. Geoffrey Brooks reminds us that socialist realism was both less and more than what it was on the surface, because it was entirely dependent on the extra literary commentaries and a wider system of authoritative discourse. It seeks not only to instill a sense of reassurance for the success of the future, but also aims to ground this reassurance in the familiar aesthetics of reality. It was in this way that it renounced the avant-garde for not being able to convey this hope in a realistic and accessible sense, the need to depict a reality viewers felt comfortable with, alongside an almost imperceptible gloss of hope for the future, perfectly illustrates Stalin's need to ruthlessly consolidate his power. But I'd also argue that, almost tautologously, Stalin probably didn't believe this was power for power's sake, but believed it was a consolidation of power necessary to resist the powers of the old regime and the influence of capitalism. Stalin may have considered it socialist then, but not in the way it claims to be. And while there are noteworthy examples of the genre, How the Steel Was Tempered is still read enthusiastically in China today, Andrei Siniatsky called socialist realism half classicist, half art, which is none too socialist and is not realism at all. If you like these videos and would like to support me making more, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook by clicking the links in the description. At the end of the 19th century, as a revolutionary mood swept across Europe, a new style of art developed in Tsarist Russia. The avant-garde movement broke with millennia of artistic